Alright, so in this video I'm going to talk a little bit about the 91 Honda CRX that I've got here. I bought this almost 2 years ago, and I purchased it to replace the red one that I used to have, if you saw any of my previous videos. That one, I realized I was never going to finish doing the rebuild and get it inspected, so I ended up pulling some parts I wanted off of it and swapping them onto this car. So, when I bought it, it was essentially a stock vehicle, and since then, I've done a B-Series swap. This was done, I did this just before the last winter. So what I've got here, let's see if you can see it. It's a B18C1 block, and I've got a B16 head on it. The transmission is a hydraulic transmission out of an Integra LS. I did that to get the longer gearing because this was primarily going to be driven on the highway. So the short gears, wasn't a huge fan of them for trying to do long distance driving. I noticed when I was going on the highway with the stock D-Series motor with the SI transmission, to do about 120, 130 kilometers an hour, the engine was working on close to like 4,000 revs, and it was a little excessive, so that's why I went with the LS transmission for the longer gearing. For the internals of the motor, it was a rebuild before I got it. Wasn't too many kilometers on it. I paid about $1,500 Canadian to have, well, that's total cost with the motor and the shipping. It's got, for internals, I think it's got an Eagle crank and some combination of forged rods and pistons. I think the it was a low compression ratio build, so eventually I will turbo it. Haven't done that yet, so I have no idea what kind of power it's putting out. But it's not ideal for keeping it naturally aspirated, so turbo is in the future. To do the actual swap, I've got the Sport motor mount kit. For the hydraulic transmission, I do actually have the Sport converter thing here, which takes the clutch cable and converts it into a hydraulic system. For under the car, the shift linkage is also Sport linkage. Distributor, I think that came off of a 99 Civic, and I did also make my own adapter to go from the OBD2 to the OBD0 connectors on the stock harness. Intake manifold, that was off of B16, I believe. I got it on eBay because I didn't have a compatible manifold. Fuel injectors were off of a GSR that I had the parts to. So because I'm running the GSR injectors, I also deleted the injector box, so just soldered the wires together because you don't need that. The throttle cable. This is, I believe it's the original D-Series cable, and then I got this plate there that converts it to the B-Series manifold. For the exhaust manifold, I went with a Megan Racing two-piece header design. The part number for that one, I don't actually know the part number, but it was for the 94 to 2001 Integra LS, not the GSR model. On their website, if you go and look up the GSR one, it's a single piece, and I don't think it would have actually physically fit in the engine bay here. Talking a little bit more about the hydraulic transmission, the master cylinder is from an S2000, and then I've also got this adapter plate that you need to purchase to convert that to any other standard Honda. And then I just bought a length of hydraulic line here and then bent it to fit right down to the slave cylinder down there. The actual clutch cable that I'm using, I believe that was off of a 90 to 93 Integra. It's a little bit shorter than the D series one. When I was running it before, it seemed to be grabbing inside, so I pretty much have it loose here with just one thing here holding it in place. For my alternator, I don't remember what car it came out of, probably like a 92 or 93 Integra. What I was hoping to avoid was beating the crap out of the side of the engine bay, so I went with a smaller, well, as short of a belt as I could find, which apparently is off of a Del Sol, but the pulley still came kind of close to the side way down in there. So if you look at a lot of B series instructions online, they tell you to take a sledgehammer to the car, so that is what I had to end up doing, but yeah, I guess it works. To make your exhaust fit, I didn't have to go too crazy, but I did take an angle grinder way down in there and just kind of shaved a bit of metal out of the way for the exhaust piping. You won't be able to see it, but when it comes to the rear mount, one thing, the instructions do tell you the rear motor mount that's supplied from Hasport, it actually uses different bolt holes than the stock mount you're removing. Pay attention to that, because otherwise you'll wonder why your mounts don't line up. When it comes to cooling, this is where it gets a little interesting. So, because the B series cooling hoses are actually, and the ports obviously are larger than the D series, what I did is I went and got a radiator out of a, I think it was a second generation Integra, and to make this fit into the car, well, this no longer really lines up with the bracket piece that was in here. This one kind of did, but I had to cut off the insides there. I don't know, it's pretty stable. I don't care. It seems to do well. My problem was my hydraulic stuff is in the way of the radiator fan, which stuck out too far to fit. So, because my CRX actually came with air conditioning, its original radiator had this small fan on there. So, they were getting close to the end of my timetable for my swap, and I was running out of fucks to give, so I took the air conditioner fan, bent metal and did whatever to make it fit onto the Integra radiator, and then hooked it up to the main radiator fan line. It's ghetto, but you know what? It seems to do the job for this purpose, so whatever. So when it came to doing the axles, because the motor and transmission were all newer in generation, I went with the 94 and up half shaft and axles to be compatible with the transmission and everything. It was relatively easy to swap in. The instructions will tell you that you'll have to remove like a dust boot off of, I guess it's the hub assembly or whatever it's called. I just used a flathead screwdriver, I believe, to pry that off. You can also knock off the ABS rings off the axles. Just use like a punch and a hammer and kind of like tapped around it until it just came off. A couple other things to know about the swap. With the Hasport mounts that I'm running, the motor does stick up further above the hood line than the previous motor. So, I had to do a little cutting of the under hood webbing. This obviously is not a good idea, but as I said before, I believe, I stopped caring about the car. I just want to get it done. I will probably be the last owner of this car, well, the shell anyway. I'll show you how the rust is. Like it's beat up. Like you got rust spots, and paint peeling off in various places. The paperwork for this car said it was previously registered and driven in Winnipeg, so yeah, like all the salt probably did a number on the metal and stuff. So Yeah, I just stopped caring. I just wanted to get it done. I did have to do some other ghetto things. I had to put a couple spacers behind the latch thing because the hood was actually coming down on the radiator because the Integra radiator does sit a little higher than the original one. So I put some spacers in there so the hood doesn't come down as far on top of the radiator. Also had to put some spacers on the hood hinges. You can get around that by having the, the SIR type hood from the Japanese Honda that came with the B16. That has, well, the style of that hood doesn't go down, it comes up to make room for the motor. So, I mean, if you don't want to go and spend the money for a proper hood, you can do what I did and just cut shit and do ghetto things until it closes properly. For the transmission, since I did go with a transmission with longer gears, I decided to go with a lighter flywheel, mainly because I needed to go buy a new flywheel anyway, didn't have one in my shop, and I also wanted to see what the difference would be for driving it. So instead of going with a factory 18-pound flywheel, I installed a 12-pound flywheel. And since I was just primarily doing highway driving, I went with like an OEM Exidy clutch and pressure plate setup. So, you know, I don't race the car. I don't care about that. So, factory-ish was good enough for me there. So yeah, this car has seen better days. It looks like the previous owners did attempt to do some sort of rust work. It's very obvious where the work starts and ends, as you can see by this paint that doesn't actually match the rest of the car. So it's got rust bubbling up along the rear there. On this side, this is where it gets actually pretty bad. It looks like they had previously tried to do something. However, it's falling apart, and I've got some holes there. Now these I'm probably going to try sanding down, covering with Bondo, and painting over, just so it doesn't look just absolute shit. But the rest of the car, I mean, I know it's not going to last too much longer. I've got bubbling going on in various places here, like along the roof here, but whatever. Also, when I bought the car, there was just a piece of tape over an empty hole. It didn't have the rear wiper, so I took the wiper off my other CRX before I tossed it, put it in there. They had the for sale sign on the inside of the window with like duct tape, so the residue is like permanently on there. Yeah, that's fantastic. So for the exhaust, what I've got is I had like a complete exhaust setup that some budget muffler shop did from the headers back. It unfortunately did not include a muffler, so I kind of had to chop the piping and attach my own muffler. That's a Dynomax Super Turbo muffler, which I think is the quietest one that I could go buy. It's a 2.5-inch exhaust, which is kind of overkill for the motor as it currently stands, but it's the piping I already had, so this was the cheapest way to do it. It doesn't sound too loud. It does kind of have a low-end droning when it's idling at a certain RPM, but it doesn't seem too bad. So, excuse the horrible mess that's the inside of this car. I never really get around to cleaning it. Just going to talk briefly about what I've got installed in here. Right off the bat, you'll notice the steering wheel and the shifter are not from the original CRX. Those came out of a third-generation Honda Prelude. I personally like that combination better than the original CRX, so I swapped that equipment out. Also to note, I did actually previously own an '88 Honda Prelude, which is how I got into the joys of ripping around in loud Hondas. So by having that steering wheel and shifter, it kind of takes me back to those days, which is why I still drive Hondas. So one thing to note, the way the steering wheel horn works is not compatible with the original steering wheel. So in order to have a working horn on here, you'd have to wire that yourself, because on the original CRX steering wheel, just like a metal contact, which gets pushed down when you push the horn in. So that doesn't work with this. I'm going to talk a little bit about the instrument cluster. I am running the Honda Civic SIR cluster out of a 99 Civic. Running this because of the difference in the vehicle speed sensor. The transmission I'm running uses an electronic speed sensor instead of the cable type, so the old CRX cluster would not be compatible with the swap. So instead of trying to convert the electronic to a cable and do something like that, I just figured, whatever, I have this instrument cluster already in the shop, I'll install it. As you can kind of see, I ran out of fucks here too, because there's a zap strap, which is part of how that holds together. For the car's electronics, I'm running a P28 OBD1 ECU with a custom base map for, well, as close to this setup as they can make. The wiring from the ECU, the secondary harness, kind of comes out down there, and tried to keep it as clean as possible for everything. All the additional sensors that get wired up. Everything actually seemed to work the first time. I was honestly a little surprised that all the electrical did work for me, because I just kind of looked around at different pinouts and whatnot and hoped to hell it would work when I hooked it all up. And yeah, well, that's about it. I can't think of anything else worth talking about. If you do have any questions on doing this swap, you can post a comment and I'll try to get a response into you. I do recommend going to Honda Tech for any help you might need. I was on Honda Tech forums quite a bit researching some of the random crap that I was running into while doing this swap. Thank you.